What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're here to celebrate an epic milestone. Over 3 million daily active users for Final Fantasy XIV. Honestly, this is quite staggering, but for those of you who, like me, have been sitting in queue times, some of us worse than others, should know that this is something to be expected. So before we dive in, though, I do want to plug a couple things. We're giving away a lunar whale mount over on Twitter. The link will be in the description below. If you guys want to go follow us over on Twitter, that's going to be huge. Also giving away a copy of New World. If you guys want to go follow me over on Ginger Prime Twitter, that link is there. Lots of giveaways. This is going to be an exciting month. It's also September by the time this video airs. So if you guys want to go support Chris over on Twitch, almost said Twitter. So many T words, the social stuff.
1 p.m. Pacific is I think when it starts. So that's like, it's like the last couple hours of my stream before I'm taking Friday off this week. So I'll be back for Monday.
I'll be back for Monday. You're doing a nice little road trip. I don't know how much you want to share about that, but that's gonna be exciting.
Yeah. But the guy that hopped in my car with me last minute when I took a job in DC and said, "Hey, I have to drive to DC on Friday. Can you come with me?" He dropped everything and hopped in a car to sit next to me and road trip to a new job many years ago. He said he wanted to come to Texas for an extended period of time, and he wants somebody to road trip with him. So he gave me about the same amount of notice, a little bit more. And I'm getting on a plane after stream, and I'm going to fly out there and then drive back to where I am right now.
You're a good friend, man. Like, honestly, guys, I don't know if I could even in words describe to you like how awesome Chris is, just like as a person and as a friend in real life. You only get a slice of him on stream, but at the end of the day, like, yeah, he's somebody who you definitely want in your corner. This is also the guy he's talking about is me but the WoW version of me. So if we have a video somewhere back on the channel of us talking about it and us laughing about Chris's like different kind of mannerisms and stuff like that. But yeah, so just note that Chris is going to go hang out with the WoW version of Brian. And then Brian will be hanging out with Chris on Monday. So let's talk about some numbers. Let's talk about some information, because honestly, at the end of the day, this is pretty epic. I do want to talk about the World of Warcraft here. You can see it listed as number 2. We're going to get into some numbers. We're going to also speculate or tell you that this isn't official numbers. Nobody has official numbers. If you want official numbers, go work for Blizzard or go work for Square and leak those if you want to not work there any longer. But Chris, what do
the most recent number from either of these two companies is Final Fantasy released a number in May saying they were at 23 million.
23 million.
It was 22 million in February.
Yes.
And so from February to May, we went from 22 to 23. And
that's
according
huge.
to this website, I will say that would be a substantial jump. Just a handful of months later, be up 50% of the player base. Total players, that count usually means non-trial have given you credit card information.
Well, and here's the kicker though, like, and this is where some of the discrepancy will, because what MMO population does is I call it a heat map. It's really temperature, because they take into account like social engagement, like on Reddit, which is an important factor. It gauges interest, but it doesn't necessarily mean active subscribers or active players. This, I would estimate, between Yoshi P's number and this number, we don't know what the difference is. We expect it on the 18th. We will get a good gauge on that gap, but I believe Yoshi P never actually reports trial accounts in his active in that announcement of players. So that's 23 million non-trial accounts. I would venture to bet that this actually exists with trial accounts, because they're going to show up on on Reddit. And I don't know why my screen decided to go full screen, so that might look a little bit weird in the recording, but it is what it is. So just note that like this probably includes trial accounts. Yoshi P's numbers probably don't, but this is a massive growth, because I've been following this over the course of the summer, and you could still see it taking the number 1 spot. I'm going to drill into it, and then we're going to talk also about the WoW numbers, because when it comes down to it, WoW is still what you're. I think
however inaccurate this is,
yeah,
it's equally inaccurate for World of Warcraft.
But it's going to show you how big of a powerhouse WoW is and continues to be and was. Yeah. So it's those 3 things. Now, overall, like when we click into it, so it's the most played MMO right now according to the site, but it still ranks overall number 3, and I think that's related to the total players. That's why WoW still takes the number 1 spot. Daily players is ranked at 3.10 million. This is actually still going up, so it's still factoring in these numbers, and it believes the total players are that. Now, you can see obviously 14's population growth, just I guess over the last year alone. is continuing to go up very heavily. It regards this as subscribers as 32 million, and if it was subscribers, I guarantee you we'd have M plus, and we have our own version of that in this game. So note that that's people who probably have a character created. It could be maybe, I don't know. I think we would have way more than 32 million characters, but that is going to be what it is. I'm going to jump quickly over here to World of Warcraft, Chris. Talk me through these numbers. Like, was there anything here surprising? Because Classic is split out from this chart. Go ahead.
So it's hard to gauge because they're under one sub with Classic and Retail. And so the question is, like, if somebody pays to subscribe because they only want to play Classic, and somebody pays to subscribe because they're only as Retail, and somebody says, I wouldn't sub to either one, but because I can get both, I'll do it. Yeah. How do you separate those? Like, they're all being tracked in the same way. Total number of players, I don't know how they factor for people that have multiple accounts. I don't know how these things separate for bots and things like that over the years. I don't know if they're using things like Armory style websites, which Final Fantasy does have one where you go out to an official website and you can see characters created, you can see achievements. And the fact that World of Warcraft right now is within the World of Warcraft community, not within an MMO population or anything like that. But if you go to World of Warcraft content creators and people who have an inside scoop and you listen to their estimated numbers, they're talking about how critically low these are.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about how critically them seeing it as this is a ghost town, there is nobody still playing this game. And it is still pulling numbers, according to this website, that rival Final Fantasy. That is a reminder of how large World of Warcraft is, assuming these numbers are to be believed. So assuming these numbers are to be believed, that would just be a sign of a reminder of just how big they are, that Final Fantasy, on a day where they are having to regularly come out and apologize and make statements about not being able to deliver the experience that they want to new players coming in because they're being overwhelmed in Final Fantasy. So Final Fantasy is at a time above its peak. It literally cannot take the load. They are not allowing character creations on the Aether data center right now.
Right.
And World of Warcraft is considered a ghost town, and those are comparable numbers. Final Fantasy has been considered in second place for a very long time by many people, but the gap between first and second has been enormous.
So I've pulled up the Classic numbers as well, just to give us a kind of a gauge, because obviously if you combine Classic and World of Warcraft from this, it seems like
I don't know that it's 1+1.
I don't know because right, you're somewhere in both, but overall, like, this is estimating on Classic 1.22 million. Again, taking into account the Reddit, and this is where the conversation in my mind goes really quickly, is that if you're mad and you're boycotting, but you're still consuming, you're jumping out to Reddit, like, there is that lifeline. Like, WoW could, in theory, with the right leadership, the work, could fix the problems, could actually listen to the players. I love Bellular's kind of take on that. They stopped shredding all the player feedback and had to shred the documents. So right now, I think Blizzard still has a long way to go. But I thought his take on that, I literally was drinking and had to do a spit take, because it just, like, for him, it's like, oh, they finally with 5.5 actually, solved one of the core issues they've had with the game and the game's feedback. But it is a massive game. And that shouldn't be news to anybody when you have the number 5 spot and the number now essentially 2 spot, according at least to this site, in terms of like volume and players. So I think 14 is definitely I think this number would be much higher if we had servers and we had the ability to accept more players and players that had less of a login right now. What do you think, Chris? Because Yoshi P's even apologized profusely about the lack of servers.
I mean, I do think there's a lot about the new player experience right now. The act of purchasing the game, of downloading the game, of getting a character created, of getting logged in, and getting through enough of the game that it's for you. Because I don't think the first 2 hours of A Realm Reborn are functionally as good of a representation of what you will experience in the game as the first 2 hours of most other games, especially comparing World of Warcraft in this point.
Yeah.
The first 2 hours of a Shadowlands, a brand new, like going through their island and stuff, is closer to the experience that somebody might experience at in-game than the first 2 hours of A Realm Reborn. That is not because it is a good representation of WoW in-game, but it is because the first 2 hours of ARR are such a poor representation of what the game becomes. Like, in the first 2 hours, depending on how fast you play, you literally might not have made it to Sistashi yet. So you have seen 0 instanced content. So as far as you're concerned, this is a single player game. And yet the very first dungeon in the game is going to invite you to a whole new thing. You don't have job stones yet. You don't have any of this.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have, most jobs, you're talking about 1, 2, maybe 3 button rotations. Like, it's just not a good representation to be 2 hours in, as opposed to 2 hours in WoW. You've made it out of the island in the first 30 minutes and you're an hour and a half into BFA content. You've got a ton of stuff happening. And so I think there's a lot about the new player experience, both in and out of Square Enix's control, that slows growth. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I do think that's the case.
It's a perfect pivot to the conversation now about growth, though, because with WoW, like with it, the various different waves and with the various different exoduses that people have for whatever reason, this one I think being the most profound, at least right now in terms of my recent memory, just the biggest one has the most impact. We've seen it happen. I would say the first one kind of really happened with Zeppela coming over, and then kind of now essentially where you're seeing big WoW creators come over. But that doesn't mean they're all coming to Final Fantasy XIV. And they could also, I would say that they're probably seeing if 14 is a good fit for them community wise. Pyromancer, welcome to the community. We're really glad that you're here and excited for his success in that regards. Looking forward to what videos he ends up putting out, especially with kind of what we've hoped for with more lore content, here on YouTube. So be sure to watch his videos. And Ethis Asher just put out a new video the other day. So be sure to go check out Ethis if you didn't get the notification. YouTube is what it is in that regards. But I've never heard of Starbase, but it seems like a new game. Obviously having the biggest explosion of growth over the last month. New World and Lost Ark don't surprise me. Bad news for Lost Ark fans. Got pushed to 2022, so it got a big delay there. I covered that over on Ginger Prime this morning. Blessed Unleash does surprise me, but I've seen articles. People are going to check it out. And Final Fantasy having still some big growth here. And then we could just kind of go down the list itself. The biggest, obviously, most notable ones are 2 new MMOs. New World being on now the really only big new MMO release this fall. But that, I think that's going to see that, that wave, the hype spike, it's going to settle down and then it's going to either grow or it's not. So it's one of the two things. Anything from this chart here, like stand out to you in terms of like just MMO growth? Cause that's important.
I think it comes down to how accurate is the data, because we're never going to get affirmation of that. It's just a guess. And so like,
it's the closest thing we have though. Like there isn't another site out there that isn't. Yeah.
In coding, that like bad data in is bad data out. And so if all they could offer is bad data, do you still take it? And so it's really hard. Because like Reddit, for example, Reddit is not 100% representative of any community,
right?
But some much less than others. There are huge portions of the 14 community that want nothing to do with any of the 14 Reddits, and there are several of them. They want nothing to do with certain Discords. They want nothing to do with certain YouTube content creators, certain Twitch content creators, possibly those platforms as a whole. We have people who support Work to Game that say, I just can't come watch you guys stream because I don't go on Twitch.
Right.
And vice versa. I just don't really do YouTube, but I'm glad to be, hanging out with you guys live. And so how are they pulling this? Are they looking at the official websites? Because what about people that like to go and talk on the official forums? Is that a valid user? And then if you are tracking across multiple websites, how are you factoring for duplication? Those of us that are across multiple, because are you assuming that it's the same ratios across the board, that this percentage of people, because in every community, these platforms are used differently. World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy have almost an identical feature list as far as what makes an MMORPG and what gets released as far as the intent, as far as how often an expansion should be and what sorts of things should be tossed into patch style content. They're very, very, very similar, but the tone around them are drastically different. There are a number of people that say they could never play WoW because they can't get to know the story. There are a number of people that play WoW that are like, oh, I never even noticed. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And so like, it doesn't matter. So they're just different games. And so if you're trying to track them with the same heat maps, like when I see this data, I will say, like, if we're going to take this data as accurate, what is interesting here is that you're saying Final Fantasy on its best day can squeak out WoW on its worst day. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. I think that, I would hope that Final Fantasy is punching a lot harder against the state that Blizzard's in, because if you're telling me that all Blizzard has to do is get one patch right and they can pass Final Fantasy, that's kind of weird.
That's really kind of be up to the players. Like, yes, they've lost big key people, but I'm saying that, like, I think you're asking all the wrong questions. It doesn't necessarily matter. Heat maps, the engagement and the intention rate is what social media has been built off of. It's what these companies have gone to. Take, for example, Microsoft. They're following that same method. It's like, this is essentially where they're finding like this makes the most representation. Guess people are going to always want official numbers, but they're not going to get them. So you have to go off of what is engagement, and engagement ends up being, yes, like whether the fact that they're separate or not is different. But in terms of 14, well, they've got a couple big haymakers they haven't thrown yet. Oceanic Data Center is coming on board. WoW's already over there. As you start to see the fact that bigger creators have, officially making the move, doing this, like Preach is another big one. Like those are going to leave a power gap that people can come and fill, but Blizzard has to deliver on it, and they have to get out of the bad news cycle.
Preach is just trying it as part of a subathon. So once again, like he may only get a couple hours of gameplay. That's not going to be highly representative of any long-term commitment from him.
Right. So what I think what's happened is a lot of people shifted into this nomad kind of, perspective. They're looking for either a new MMO home, or maybe they're big enough that they can actually like maintain a couple of different games and just essentially kind of play and enjoy. I think what we've seen here is with Blizzard is that I don't think, like, even if they have a really good patch, that they're going to be the juggernaut that they once were, even if they continue to deliver time and time again. I think what this has opened it up for 14 and for others is actually a better way forward for MMOs. Having kind of a more even playing field and having a little bit more fluidity between the games, ultimately, I think opens it up to kind of bringing back innovation. People have settled into what makes an MMO because it ends up being the safe thing. WoW found a formula, it worked for them, and so it became a risk to create anything else. But in that not creating something so different, that's where you've seen all these games come and go. And so you have to think about like what makes your game different and where can you invest, while at the same time not losing the language that people speak. 14.1.0, literally, if you came from WoW, you would not know what the W key did. You would not know what the L key did. You wouldn't know because it wasn't a one-to-one language interpretation. And so it just added an extra level of frustration. Imagine saying, hey, Chris, we're going to move you to France. Oh, great. Do you speak French? No? Okay. Well, you're going to need to learn French, and then you're going to need to go do this thing. You've always wanted to do it, but it's only available in this a different language. And then, so that's essentially what I'm seeing here, is that a flattening of kind of the mountain peak here, and essentially allowing it to see now. I think what really ends up happening, like I said, 14's on consoles. WoW isn't. That's not going to happen anytime soon. 14 still has platforms it can come to. Xbox is another example of something we bring up more often than not. 14, I would say, is actually on a growth trend, and it could be. We could see another mountain peak form. It's just a question of, will it happen? Or we also see new players coming into the space as well that are ready to take up any of the people who have sworn off WoW for good.
I just question what the numbers mean. Like, because A, I don't know where these numbers came from, so I don't know how accurate they are, right? B, because they're not using them from official numbers, so they're always a guess.
Yeah.
B, like with these numbers, what am I supposed to read from them? Is the number of people that play a game what determines its quality? No. Do any of these games on this list, any of them, need validation of these numbers being published on MMO population?
Nope.
Not a single one. Should the game I play be based on what game has the most players? No.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you ask questions like, okay, if this is a relative scale, what does one game on its strongest day look like compared to another game in its weakest? And what does that mean financially for the stability of these games? What does that mean they can swing for when they talk about, we would like to do the following things with these games? What does that mean when you talk about adjacent IPs at the same company? Because money does get funneled out of these games when they're having profitable years. It gets funneled in when they're having non-profitable years. These companies, they spread the money around. And so what does that look like when you talk about Square Enix making money across multiple properties? That's what allows them to take risks like Octopath Traveler and Project Triangle Square. Mm-hmm. Those come out of surpluses to spin up a full new team to develop games for the Switch where they had not been making money like that prior. Where did that money come from for that team? That came from other successful IPs. So I think these numbers, if anything, what they inform me is the health and stability and growth of the game as a further affirmation of that. I think we all know that. I think we know Shadowbringers will likely go down as one of the best expansions we ever play in our lives. Even if every expansion after this is good, it doesn't have to be better than Shadowbringers because it set an incredible bar. I think that Endwalker has the chance to throw a 10 years of buildup into the fire and just see what happens,
Yeah.
which is something like that's crazy. So that should be a rarely lived through experience, regardless of how we feel about it afterwards. There's a lot exciting about 14, and all this tells me is that like the growth is there and that we're not alone in this, and that Square Enix is being rewarded financially for this, which should help the people whose job it is to keep the lights on and make those decisions to keep funding the people who are making the creative decisions. Which is good. And like, that's all these numbers tell me. They don't tell me to unsubscribe or to subscribe to a certain game. They don't tell me to put my playtime in a certain game. As a content creator, it still wouldn't inform me, because this doesn't tell me how people engage with content from those games. And so if I was like, hey, I want to make a guide for 3 of these games, let me look at which one's the biggest. That doesn't tell me how they perform as far as those guides on YouTube. I'd be better off going out to YouTube and searching those topics and finding how those videos do. So it's not wildly helpful in any way beyond just affirming things you probably already think and had as information. So it's just a further data point to continue a narrative, which I think is really dangerous, because it doesn't have a chance to take you in a new direction. It's not like if you'd seen this and WoW was still bigger, you would feel differently. So it feels like data that can just fuel an echo chamber. It doesn't feel like data that moves the discussion forward.
And I'm adding this to the stream here real quick. Chat actually sending this link. Method apparently tweeting out this image, and people wondering what they might be reading into. So yeah, I guess we're going to see an announcement maybe soon from Method. You got 2 doors, World of Warcraft on the left, something on the right. Chris, you want to weigh in as a final thought before we conclude today's video?
Method already has teams outside of World of Warcraft. They're known for World of Warcraft, but they've already had teams outside of World of Warcraft. So once again, I'm excited for whatever they choose to take on, but they have already spun up teams. They have a huge number of creators under them. Just like Max from Limit has been playing Final Fantasy and progging. I think they got E4S down today. So whatever they choose to play.
Who knows? It doesn't mean 14. It's just a question mark. So
yeah,
we'll
just keep in mind that Method is not even, they don't have the reputation they once did in the WoW community. So they are rebuilding across the board anyway. So picking up a new game makes
complete sense. Makes complete sense. All right. Why don't you take us out?
Yeah. So I think all in all, I don't consider things like this any more than leaks. And like you guys have seen me talk about leaks in the past, I don't put a huge amount of stock in them because they're not backed by anything. So I'm sure the people that worked on these numbers worked very, very hard and are making the most educated guess possible, but it is just a guess. And so for us to speculate on top of speculation, feels like it can get pretty reckless pretty fast, but it's an interesting topic along the way. So if you want to toss some speculation on top of this speculation, let us know in the comments below. For Chris and Brian, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Take care.